Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations. My name is Ashyana, and I am your host. Today, with us, we have a very special guest. Her name is Anjum Sultana, the National Director of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at YWCA Canada. We virtually sat down to talk about a recent report, the Lockdown Generation Report, which Anjum co-authored along with Jessica Liu from YMCA Canada. This report talks about the realities that youth have been facing before and during this pandemic, as well as gives insights into key policy recommendations that will drastically change our future. We talk about the election and what this election means, as well as ways youth can get involved and make sure their voices are heard. We are so excited for you to have a listen.
Hi, Ashyana. So great to be here on this podcast with you. My name is Anjum Sultana. I am the National Director of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at YWCA Canada. And just this past month, I had the honor of co-authoring a report on preventing a lockdown generation in Canada with Jessica Liu at YMCA Canada. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Anjum, for your time today. We are so excited to have you here to hear more about the report, as well as your expertise and insight about the ways youth have been navigating and have been impacted by this pandemic. So just to start off, before we get into the report itself, as we navigated this pandemic as a society, in what ways have you seen youth left at the margins through policy and media response?
Thanks for this great question. There's been so many things that have happened, and young people have borne the brunt of the pandemic in so many ways on every front, from losing their employment and losing pay to experiencing disruptions in schooling and training, to finding it difficult to find an affordable place to live. And all of that leading to this ever-growing mental health crisis. So we're seeing young people have been hurting, but at the same time, they've been stepping up for their community in remarkable ways, whether it's through mutual aid networks or volunteering. Actually, young people are one of the generations that have volunteered the most during this pandemic and even before. And, really pushing us all around an equitable response to this pandemic, whether it's relief efforts, response, or even recovery. And so my thing is, how can we step up for young people and invest in their leadership and invest in the organizations that support them? So I think they have done so much for us, and I say myself in that group too as a young person, but I think it's time for all of us as a society to step up for them as well.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that really inspired this podcast was, like you said, young people are doing a lot of the work. They're having the ingenuity, they're stepping up for their communities, right? And we need to highlight that. One thing that this report does is young people are referred to as a part of this lockdown generation. So can you tell us about the lockdown generation and what do you mean when you say lockdown generation?
Yeah, so the lockdown generation, it's a term that the International Labor Organization first coined to really highlight how young people around the world have been impacted. And, it's a play on a few different things. The lockdown measures, which were really important from a public health perspective to stop the spread of COVID, had ripple effects. The ripple effects being many of the sectors that were shut down through lockdowns are the same sectors that young people are disproportionately working in. So hospitality, tourism, retail, food services. So we're seeing that negative impact on their employment because of the necessary lockdown measures. We're also seeing this idea that because of all of that action that was taken to protect public health, there could have been impacts on young people not realizing their full potential and being locked away from opportunities. So that's another way we've seen how young people may risk becoming the lockdown generation, and that being not only the thing that they've experienced, but the thing that could define their future. And then finally, we're also seeing because of those lockdown measures, because of everything that we've all experienced for the last 18 months, that has also had an impact on people's ability to connect. That social isolation that's happened because of the time that we're in, that's also had an impact on mental health and well-being. And we're seeing, again and again in multiple studies, young people between especially the ages of 18 to 30 are one of the generations that are reporting the least amount of life satisfaction in this current moment in time, impacts on their mental health and well-being. So on all these fronts, we're seeing that lockdown generation potentially emerging because of this pandemic.
I think the way you framed it as being locked away from opportunity is so key. As a young person, I have lots of friends who have just graduated, right? Not only locked away from opportunity, we're locked away from flourishing in any way we kind of know how. That's been taken away from us, and we've had to re-navigate our own lives. And so, as you mentioned at the beginning, you've had the opportunity to kind of spearhead with Jessica from YMCA Canada this report, Preventing a Lockdown Generation. We're going to link it in the description. It came out on International Youth Day, and it's described as a plan to support Canada's youth in the post-pandemic. So can you tell us a bit more about this report? What inspired you guys to write this, and what your hopes are for it now that it's out there and getting traction?
So many things came out during this pandemic, and it really got us thinking about, how do we come back from this crisis? How do we ensure that we recover from this crisis in an equitable way? And like I mentioned, one of the groups that we're not talking about enough in our country and in many countries around the world are young people. And so this was our response to what we were seeing on the ground when it came to employment, housing, mental health services, education, and more. And we also saw that despite all the challenges that young people have faced, they are stepping up for their communities in remarkable ways. And so we need to invest in young people and the organizations that support them. And that was really the pillars, if you will, of this plan. And I'll say, to be honest, the impacts of this crisis on young people, especially young women, has been keeping me up at night, because I really worry about this potential lost generation, right? And I share this worry because I also think that worry can inspire action. This concern can also inspire us to take further action. And so, I meet through my work remarkable young people across the country, and I think we need to step up for them like they've stepped up for us. And that's what our hope is with this plan and with this report.
I think it's such an amazing report because as a young person, so much of what young people experience, especially intersectionally, is invisible. We're not talked about in the media. We're not, referred to in specific policies. So to bring that to the forefront, I think is so, so important. And so this report zeroes in on 6 areas of focus: building an inclusive society, promoting meaningful employment for young people, ensuring housing for all, supporting mental health and well-being, investing in youth leadership, and supporting the youth serving sector. Now, can you briefly explain to us how you guys decided to focus on these specific areas?
Yeah, so this report was a collaboration with 2 of the largest youth-focused charities in the country, the YWCA Canada and the YMCA Canada. And we are there, and we're in fact also the 2 of the oldest youth-focused charities. So we are both like 150 plus years old. So we've seen the impacts on young people over the generations. And so for us, it was really, many of these pillars were grounded in the work that we do. So we do a lot of employment and training programs for young people. We do a lot of leadership programming for young people. We're a youth serving sector ourselves, and we're seeing these challenges on the ground. And we were also really inspired by some great work being done by globally focused youth organizations. So, being part of the YWCA Canada, we're also part of the World YWCA. And there's actually this incredible initiative called the Big Six Initiative. So the 6 largest youth-focused organizations in the world have come together to do global work on youth recovery. And it's being supported by the United Nations Foundation and the World Health Organization, and really putting young people not only as the focus of our attention, but actually investing in the solutions that young people themselves have come up with. And I'll say, as 2 young women who wrote this report, that's something that really, hits home, close to home. And also, through this work, we've also engaged with incredible young people to be reviewers, to be contributors. It's also something where in Canada, for the first time ever, we've started to really talk about a national youth policy. And earlier this month, the first State of Youth report in the country was also put forward. And so many of our pillars also align with that ongoing piece of work that the government has been putting out. So we're really interested in building on great work and amplifying, and also centering young people in the conversation.
I think that's so important. I've been involved in some of the World YWCA work, the global work. You see a lot of youth voices starting to be heard. So bringing that into Canada, I think, is so important. And I think the investing piece, investing in youth leadership, ensuring housing for all. Housing, I think, is not an issue that gets talked about with youth often enough. So seeing these pieces come together is so great. And so when we planned this episode, the election hadn't been announced yet, but I think it's really pertinent to talk about because a lot of what this report recommends, I think, is so great. I think politicians should look at it when they're starting to want to reach out to youth, because this is showing what young people want and what is important to us and what we've gone through. So in what ways can young people help to support that the work that this report aims to do and push for change, especially during election season? A lot of young people are on social media. Hopefully we can get them to know about this report. I know a lot of people are reading it right now, but what can they do? So they've read it. They're like, I resonate with this. This aligns with my experiences, what I want to see done in the future. But how can I be a part of pushing for this change?
Yeah, these are such great questions. And I find elections are this incredible opportunity for us as a country, as a community, to define what do we want as our future. And I think right now we're at this turning point. There's this turning point, this crossroads that we're at, where we can potentially build back from this crisis, but revert back to the status quo with perhaps the veneer of more inclusive language. And maybe it sounds a bit more, it sounds better, but really it's still very much what was there before. Or we can fundamentally change the way we structure our society. Because what we found with this pandemic is that things were not working for many people. Things were not working for people who are the most structurally marginalized.
Yeah.
And so in this moment where we have, two directions we can go, this report, we hope, provides a roadmap for where we can go in a more transformative and more just way. A more just society is possible. And these are some of the ways that we can get there. I think also, we have to really understand that for so long, young people and their issues have been sidelined. They have been forgotten about, as you said. They have not been centered. But guess what? In this election, millennials and Gen Z make up 40% of the electorate. We are a substantial force. We are, as some organizations have kind of put it, the future majority. And so I think finally we have a moment to really put these conversations, experiences, and challenges at the center of public policy conversations and just broader Canadian conversations, right? Because in a way, an election is a conversation about the future we want, the Canada we want. And with our ballot, with our vote, we get to be part of that conversation. But that's just one way. There's so many things that we can do as we come up towards September 20th, election day. So one of the things I would encourage is definitely for folks to check out preventingalockdowngeneration.ca, because we'll have more resources in the days to come. And one of the things we're going to be encouraging people is to really push the Leaders Debate Commission, so the group that's responsible for hosting the federal leaders debate, one that's happening September 8th, another that's happening September 9th, to have a conversation around how is each political party going to prevent a lockdown generation? How are they going to invest in young people? Let's actually send them as many emails as possible. So this is part of the conversation. This is part of the agenda of those national leaders debates. That's one. Two is let's get our voices heard. And I really, really encourage people, if there's a topic in the lockdown generation report that inspires people, write a letter to the editor, write an op-ed, engage the media. Let journalists know what you think. And we are starting to see some, media programs start to put on youth panels or have more of a conversation about youth and the election. Let's keep that going, because if we're not talked about in the public discourse, then we're forgotten about. So we can play a role in getting that message out there. And I would say social media is a fantastic place to get the conversation going. And so we will have on our website, for example, social media graphics and sample tweets and things that people can put out to increase the pressure and also increase the conversation on this. And I'll say, when elected candidates are coming to your door or coming to chat with you about getting your vote, you can ask them, what are you going to do for young people who have been the hardest hit in this pandemic and will experience the fallout of this time for 10 years, if not longer? So not only have young people been hurting now, but if we don't do something, they will be hurting for many years to come. And that can have implications for all of us. So that's also something we talk about in the report. Young people and their participation in the economy and beyond, that's something that is impacting them, but will actually impact our country's future GDP as well and our economy. So we're literally all in this together. So let's make sure those conversations are at the forefront.
Hearing that statistic that, 40% of the electorate is millennials and Gen Z, right? It just shows we can't be pushed to the side any longer. We can't be siloed as a group any longer. Our demographic cannot be siloed. We are the future of Canada, and it's important that politicians see that and we see that ourselves, and we push ourselves to be active and have our voices heard in this election. And so question I've been asking all my guests is, what does advocacy mean to you? You are someone that is extremely involved in the advocacy space. You push for change on a multitude of levels, but at the baseline, what does advocacy mean to you?
Advocacy to me means a continuous pursuit of justice, a continuous pursuit of a better world, a world that is something that works for all of us, because for so long it has not worked for all of us. So I find advocacy something that you will never finish, because there's always something that can be better. And I think that is at the core of what I see as advocacy. And I really sincerely believe each one of us can be an advocate wherever we are and wherever we hold influence, whether it's within your organization or whether it's within your community of all types. We each can make it a better place. And I think it really is up to us to figure out what are our strengths. We have different strengths, different ways that we like to engage, and leverage that. If you're an artist, how can you leverage your art to be an advocate? If you are a mathematician, how can you leverage your skill set to be an advocate? And if you're a researcher, how can you leverage that skill to be an advocate? We can all play a role. I think it's just figuring out, where do we want to make the most impact? And I want to share a statistic just to really highlight what is at stake. And one of the big things we've heard during this pandemic is the gendered impacts of this crisis, and zeroing in on women, but specifically young women. Gen Z women make up 2.5% of our labor force, but they have experienced 17% of the job losses. Why are we not hearing about this? And again, anytime you lose your job, it's difficult, but the earlier on in life, it is way more dramatic, that implication. And so I'm really worried, and I think we should all be worried about what is happening to young women in this country and their labor force participation and their ability to reach their full potential. We've done so much over the last number of decades to really make a concrete impact on gender equality. And my hope is that this pandemic accelerates that push towards progress and doesn't take us back 30 years. And I think we have a real opportunity right now in this election to set that direction.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I was just about to ask, as two young women on this podcast, can you tell us more about the gendered impacts of the pandemic and what those implications are? 17% of unemployment we've experienced, only making up 2.5% of the workforce. That is crazy. And that is something that worries me as well. And like you said, these are things that it's not just this year when the pandemic's done, these things will go away. It's for generations. Our generation will be impacted as we go through life.
Highlighting that housing piece, I think this is also causing a lot of anxiety for young people. And young people are feeling like their generation is being left behind, whether it's finding an affordable place to live, whether it's renting. This is something we can't ignore. And I think right now, that is something we need to put a spotlight on in this election, because this, again, if we don't address it right now, we're going to be dealing with the negative impacts for decades to come. And I know a lot of young people, my age and younger, this is perhaps one of their top concerns, their top two concerns: employment and housing. And so that's something we can't ignore in this crisis.
Yeah, I just saw a tweet this morning, and someone had tweeted that a politician had said, at some point, a Canadian politician, at some point, you just have to accept only people of a certain socioeconomic class will be able to afford detached housing. And as a young person, to hear that, like you said, like I'm 22, and that is something that's already on my mind. Will I ever be able to afford a home in the city that I grew up in, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are people I know who want to move out of their homes, but there are so many financial barriers, right, that don't allow for that. And I think something we had discussed is it's not just building more homes. It's not just about affordable housing. It's about destroying the barriers that create this inability to access housing, and that make people think it's okay to say things like, oh, once you reach a socioeconomic level, then you can have detached housing. Like, that's not the attitude we should be having at all. And I think a lot of young people are losing sleep over housing, especially, and employment.
Yeah, it's not a nice to have. It is an essential part of a good life. And I think that's what's missing. And that's something we really need to address right now before it gets even further out of control. And I think that's something young people of all political stripes are really concerned with. And I hope in this election, we'll see some real solutions. Yes. So I think a lot about what will be the legacy of this crisis? What will be the legacy of this pandemic? Obviously, we've all been affected on an individual and collective level in different ways. But what will we have to show from this time? And I'll say, I've been reading a lot about the histories of pandemics and the histories of crisis, and what does that result in for a country or result in for a society. And I'll say, like, back in the 1300s, when medieval Europe was going through the bubonic plague and experiencing that pandemic, one of the things that was interesting is that in parts of Europe, that was actually the trigger, the catalyst for moving from a feudalistic society to an agrarian capitalistic society. So there was actually a shift in the way the economy worked because of that pandemic and what happened. And I'm wondering, what will be the economic implications of this time? And I think for many of us, our relationship to work has changed. And I think people are also understanding what type of work is essential to keep the economy going, like the care economy. So my hope is that one of the legacies of this pandemic is we have a childcare system and a care economy that works for all of us. And I think that's going to be something when historians look at, my hope, decades from now, they'll say that this pandemic was one of the reasons why we have a nationwide early learning and childcare system. That was one of the legacies of this time. And I think, that gives me hope. But that also drives me that, we need to focus on this because, we've learned so many lessons during this pandemic, but what will we actually apply and keep with us for decades to come? And my hope is around the care economy.
Yeah, I think civil society and civil society organizations have really recognized that this is a very opportune time for change. This report has just come out, Preventing a Lockdown Generation. USA has a COVID-19 policy paper where they're pushing for change. And it's important that the decision leaders as well understand, like you said, like this is a time for like change at all levels. We don't want to go back to the way things were because we can be better. And so again, one thing I've been asking everyone is, what are you looking forward to? This pandemic has been an extremely difficult time for everyone. We're not out of the gates yet, but September starting. A new year for many of the students I've spoken to is starting. And we've been vaccinated, which has been very exciting as well. So I don't know if there's anything you're looking forward to, whether that be in the next week, month, or year.
Yeah, I think relationships have mattered more than ever. I think I've had a greater appreciation for all the different types of relationships and connections in my life. And so I'm hoping to reconnect with people, maybe see them in person, maybe actually start to see the country a bit more and travel, because that's been something that's been challenging for the last 18 months or so. And I think, conversation. I think there's so many things that have happened, but I think now people are starting to kind of reawaken and reconnect back in the world again. And so, yeah, I'm excited for all those conversations and connections to come.
Thank you so much, Anjum, for joining us today, and thank you everyone for listening. As always, to learn more about USA, check us out at www.ousa.ca. And if you're interested in reading the Lockdown Generation Report, remember it's linked in the description.